The most important part about organizing any space is to do it in a way that makes it easy to maintain. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time on a temporary fix. Doing this isn't really complicated, but it's also not necessarily intuitive either. So that's what this video is all about. I'm going to share what I consider to be like the one guiding principle of home organization that everything else follows from. And I'm going to be walking through the process that I use with an example in my own house of how I organize a space to actually align with that concept. Because I find when I do that, I'm way more likely to keep the space organized. So let's go. My only credential is that I'm one of those freaks who likes to organize things for fun. So I've done it quite a bit, but more than that, I've also thought about it a lot. I like to know why. If somebody tells me to do something a certain way, I'm probably going to be asking why before I can get behind it. So with home organization, my line of questioning kept bringing me to the same answer again and again and again, which is this: that how often you use something needs to correlate to how easy it is to access. That's it. That's what all of home organization comes down to. That's what everything else stems from. And that's what all of the bins and tips and tricks and hacks and storage solutions are trying to achieve. When those two things are aligned, your house is organized. And not only that, but it's easy to keep organized, because when things are easy to access, they're also easy to put away. I really think it's as simple as that. Let me show you what I mean. So every object in your house has some level of use, right? From things you use multiple times a day down to things you use maybe once a year or less or never. And every place in your house, from your kitchen countertop to the back corner of your basement, has some level of access. And so what I mean by aligning these two things is that the more you use something, the easier it should be to access, and vice versa. So high-use items go in high-access areas. Medium-use items go in medium-access areas. Low with low, and so on. And the things that you never use, you should really never be able to access. And that means you gotta get rid of them. The best part is you can apply this at any scale. You could organize your whole house this way, a room, a closet, a drawer, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. For example, in a kitchen, you've got items you use every day, once a week, once a year, and you've also got a range of accessibility, right? The countertop's very easy to access. Inside the cupboard is a little bit harder. And like the back of your pantry might be one of the hardest areas to access. You make coffee every day, put that out on your counter. Use your frying pan about once a week. Maybe that goes in the cupboard under the stove. Your turkey baster is probably rarely used, right? So stow it away so you can get it when you need it, but it's not in your way 11 months of the year. Because when you have to dig through stuff you don't use to get to stuff you need, that's when things literally get messy. Same thing applies in the bathroom. I hope to God you're using your toothbrush daily, so you probably want to put that out and accessible. Q-tips are probably a little less often, and extra toilet paper can probably go like on a shelf in your closet. I don't know how quickly you go through rolls, but the point is, think about it and put it in a place that matches how often you need it. And when I said you can do this at any scale, this is what I mean. So I already put weekly items like the Q-tips in the bathroom drawer, right? Well, if we zoom in on that, I can break it down even further because the front of the drawer is easier to get to than the back. So the things I use a few times a week, like hair ties, I'm going to put up front. And the things I use less often, like maybe a face mask, I'm going to put towards the back. But the concept is all the same. I've done this in many areas of my home, but not my front coat closet. So we're going to use that as an example so that I can show you what I'm talking about as we go through it. Okay? Okay. This is my entryway closet and the state it's currently in. It's not horrible, but it is constantly messy and it frustrates me a little bit every day, which is a telltale sign it's past due for some organizing. So let's get into it. First, I asked myself, what is the function of this space? How do I want it to function? How do I think it should be functioning? But equally as important is how is it actually functioning? Because keeping things organized means making it easy on yourself, remember? And that means working with your natural tendencies, not trying to change all of your behaviors. And when you understand the function from that perspective, it makes it a lot more easy to understand what items should stay there and which ones need to move. I want this to function as the place that I can easily grab the last things I need when heading out the door and then drop those things when coming back home. Basically all the things I don't want or need once I'm inside the house. And for me, that means coats, shoes, warm accessories like hats and gloves and scarves mainly. I also like to keep grocery bags in here, so I'm noting that as well. Some people might want to keep purses in a front closet if that's where they naturally drop them. I personally like to choose and pack my purses in my bedroom closet. So for me, it doesn't make sense to keep those in here. And that's what I mean by working with your natural tendencies, by noting where you naturally use and drop things, not just where you think they should be used or dropped. Next, I like to diagnose the space and note what things are clearly not working. Depending on the state of the space you're trying to organize, it might just feel like nothing's working, and that might be true. But if you're somewhere in the middle, try and pick out a few things that are very clearly not working. Ask yourself, what are the things that annoy me on a consistent basis? What are the things that frustrate me? What are the things I consistently can't find? What are the areas that become messiest the most often? Things like that. And those will usually lead you right to the things that aren't working. In my closet, I feel like the only thing that's working for me is the coat rack. Everything else is sort of a dysfunctional mess. But there are two things in particular that annoy me most, so I want to make sure to address those. If I want to get a hat, this is what I'm working with. Okay, I have this bin that contains all my hats and gloves in one pile. And you can guess how that goes. So in addition to that, I just have spillover onto the ground, because when I'm in a hurry and I'm looking for a specific hat, I just have to pull everything out of there. So this is definitely not working for me. That one's gonna have to change. Also, the floor is just like a total mess, covered in shoes. There's also this like weird crack back here behind the shoe rack that like things just go to die. If something goes back there, I never see it again. So that's not working. Okay, this next step is arguably the most important one, which is to figure out where on the spectrum of use all of your items in that space fall, because that's going to directly inform where they go. You're going to start with two categories. One are the things that you use fairly often or very often. The other are things that you rarely or never use. So start there. The things that you rarely or never use, I would encourage you to consider getting rid of. Remember, this is all about matching up the level of use with how accessible that thing is. So if you never use something, you should make it entirely inaccessible by giving it away. I feel like I should clarify real quick that emergency items are the exception to this rule. Okay, I hope you never have to use your EpiPen, but please don't get rid of it. But really, it is a massive waste of time and energy and space and money to be organizing things that you don't even use. So if you can do that, try to do that. The other category of things that you use fairly often or very often, now you're going to split those up based on function, okay? If they fit the function of the space, they're going to stay in that space. If they don't, they're going to move somewhere else. That makes more sense for them. Before I move on, I want to acknowledge that I'm kind of grazing over a pretty immense topic of decluttering. Depending on the state of your space, this could be a pretty major part of this process for you. And I know it's not always as simple as just identifying the things that you don't use and getting rid of them. Okay, our things are very intertwined with our emotional and psychological selves. And so getting rid of them can be really difficult for a variety of very good reasons. So while decluttering isn't really the focus of this video, I want to just acknowledge that it can be a pretty major and difficult part of organizing. And if for whatever reason you just feel like it's not possible for you to get rid of all of these things right now, just know you don't have to do this all at once, okay? What I would recommend doing is still flagging those items and just putting them somewhere else, getting them out of the space you're trying to organize, but just grouping them together, and you can chip away at them at a pace that works for you. That will allow you to still open up space in the area you're trying to organize, get that organized, and also experience what it's like to have an organized space, which I think in turn also helps you let go of things that you don't use. So anyways, I wanted to say that before moving on, but now back to organizing. The first thing I like to do is just to take everything out of the space if I can, so I can see it all and see what I'm working with. I find it really helpful to be able to just see everything and to be able to pick everything up when I'm trying to decide what to do with it. Also, I'm always surprised by how much stuff there is. Even in a relatively small closet like this, it's hard to tell what I have until it's all out of there. And for me, seeing how much stuff there is also helps to kind of like prime me for picking out items that I no longer need, because it just makes it so much more obvious how much stuff I actually have. So start with that if you can, and try not to start categorizing anything until it's all out of there. All right. Once it is all out of there, it's time to start categorizing. People have different ways of decluttering, so if you have something that works for you, just go with that. But I find it's way easier and faster if I try to just bucket into 2 big categories first, so I don't get bogged down in the details of each item. So I'm just starting off by sorting into those 2 big categories of things that I use fairly or very often, and ones that I pretty much never use or rarely use. Guess how many times I've used this XL men's rain suit? Yeah, exactly 0 times. And yet it's taking up like 1/3 of that top shelf in my closet. Here's my trusty box of paper cups, defunct chargers, and unknown keys. Steel-toed boots, not often used. So I'm just picking up every single thing one at a time and throwing it into one of those 2 piles, and then just moving on to the next thing. No. And after that first sort, this is what I'm left with. This pile of things I barely ever use, which I'm going to give away, and then everything else that I'm keeping. But now I'm going to go through and split this pile up into things that fit the function of the space and ones that don't, and therefore need to move somewhere else in the house. The front closet is not the place for aprons, at least for me. The running belt, however, is, because I do need to grab that on my way out the door. So that's going to stay. Bag is great. However, the front closet is not the place for it. So that's going to move somewhere else. New home for bag. I'm also pulling out items that are not for this season. Like I have a lot of shoes that I use all the time in the summer, but right now they don't fit the function of this front closet because I don't need to be grabbing them on my way out the door this time of year. You could also think about it like right now they're low use, so they should go somewhere else in the house that's lower access. Either way, they need to move. And this is after the second sort. So these things I'm going to relocate to spaces that make more sense for them in my house, and this pile are all things that are going back into the closet. All right, at this point, you have everything sorted. You've got your category of things that you use and that also fit the function of the space. And now you want to do like a dry fit of all that stuff back in the space, okay? And as you put things back in, keep in mind that like North Star concept, Because even within a closet, say, there are areas that are easier to access and areas that are more difficult to access. And so you want to match up the high use items with the high access areas and so on. So if you can get everything back into the space and meet that criteria, then you're good. If you can't, that's when you start thinking about if there's a storage solution that you might want to pull in. Okay, but doing that at this point in the process means you know exactly what needs to be stored, what type of storage is going to be most effective, what size you need, and all of that. Whereas if you just start by buying a bunch of containers and bins, you're going to end up just organizing a mess rather than getting the storage solution that supports a system that's working for you. When the space is empty, it's a perfect time to give it a good clean before everything goes back in. So I just vacuumed out the closet floor, and I also finally scraped off and cleaned this paint that's been on the floor since I painted my walls like 2 years ago. Yeah. Okay, it's time to start taking the categorized stuff and putting it back in the closet. I'm gonna be trying to match it up with like access level as best I can. So I'm putting the rack against that back wall this time to get rid of that weird gap that was a problem for me before. And then as I start to put the shoes back in here, I'm thinking through which ones I use more often than others. And I think that the back corner of that bottom rack is probably going to be the hardest to get to because I'm going to put another row of shoes in front. So I'm putting the boots I wear least often there and then just filling in the others as it makes sense. I do wear the same like 2 to 3 pairs of shoes 90% of the time. So those are all going to go in the front row to make it easy as possible to get to them. Once I hung up all my coats, then I would just like shuffle them around so that I put the ones I use less often on the ends and the ones I use a lot more often right in the middle. I have these hangers for scarves, and I do feel like they work really well because you can see all of the scarves laid out. You don't have to like move certain scarves to get to the other ones, and it's easy to remove and put back on. So I'm going to continue using these. I'm going to put all of my the ones that I wear most often on one hanger that will be more accessible. And then I'll put the other ones that I don't use as much on their own hanger, and that one I can kind of put more towards the back of the closet. So these are the warmer weather scarves that I still like and use often when the weather is appropriate. But most likely I'm not going to use those for the next few months. Then I'm putting the ones that are appropriate weather, but I just don't reach for as often. And then these guys I wear nearly every day when I go out, so I'm going to put them right in the middle. If you hate splitting up the categories like that, you don't have to do it that way, but I think this makes sense because I use these scarves more often than I use this coat. All right, it's at this point in the process that I'm starting to think about some storage solutions. All of my coats, my scarves, and my shoes are in a good spot. However, I still have my hats and my gloves with no good place to put them. So before I had them all in a bin, on top of this thing, which was not a good solution. I still have this open, but this is not a high access area. So I don't want to be putting mittens and hats that I want to use every day up there. That's going to annoy me. And this area is completely underutilized, high access. So I'm gonna get something to put over this door so that I can store my hats and mittens, have them be accessible, and not try and force these low access areas into working for those items that I actually need to get to every day. Okay, I went to Target and I got this organizer for the back of the door. They had a few different types there. I ended up getting this one. It was $9, but I liked it because The pockets are mesh, so you can see what's in there. And also because it was $9. I really liked that. And then it just comes with these little hooks that hook into here, and then you hang it over the door. Wonderful. These are the items I wear most often, so those are gonna go in this zone that is right in front of my face, and I don't have to try at all to find these things. I don't care that it's a mix of gloves and hats, I just care that they're things that I reach for all the time. Now the rest of these things I'm just gonna fill into the other spaces as the size makes sense. These are items that I don't use as often, but I want to have fairly accessible. And I don't mind, I actually like that there's some empty space in here, because inevitably I'll accumulate other things that I want to have accessible here, and it's nice to not have to like displace stuff to move it in. I can just put it in that spot. This bin used to have all my hats and gloves in it, but now that I've pulled out the ones that I use all the time and put them in the new door organizer, I can use this bin just for the ones I use every once in a while. All right, now for the top shelf. I have, oh my gosh, these shopping bags. They were just kind of like piled on the shelf like this. Just gonna turn them up on their side like this, so I can grab one out without having to move any of the other ones. Also can act as kind of like a bookend for these things. Then I have a little extra space. If you end up having extra space, you can do with it what you please. I'm gonna put these coolers back. I use them in the kitchen, which is right here. So this seems like a place that's, you know, semi-logical to put them. Since I have the extra space, I'm gonna put them there. My running belt is going in here. And then last, I have this absurdly long Pokemon keychain that I have the keys to my shed on. And I used to keep them on the back side of this door. This is now here, which is a much better use of space. So I'm gonna use a little bit of this like unused side space to just hang them on the wall in there. Then this goes there. My power went out and it's cold in here now. Anyways, I had one last final thought I wanted to share with you about the topic of like maintaining and what I mean by that. And maybe I should have said this at the beginning, but anyways, what I mean by maintaining an organized space is not that like no object is ever going to be out of its place. I think that's an unrealistic expectation and something that no one is really going to be able to uphold. Instead, what I mean is that when things inevitably do get a little bit messy or out of place, it's going to be so much faster and easier to just tidy up real quick. Okay, your space isn't going to be so far off the rails that the only option you have is to do this like massive overhaul and organize everything again. So that's the big difference that I've noticed. I hope you notice it too if you give this a shot. And that's all I got. I hope you find some of this helpful. If you give it a shot, I'd love to know what you think. Like I said, I'm not an expert by any means, and I'm just kind of throwing this theory out there to test it in the world. So if you agree with it, let me know. But maybe more importantly, if you disagree with it, let me know and let me know why. Thank you and happy organizing.